If a record label gives you $500,000, you owe that record label $500,000, and until you don't pay that money back, that record label pretty much owns everything that you did.
Dude, so you from New York, what was the next step? Because eventually you wind up, for people that don't know what Liquid has done, you wind up getting beats placed for like MTV, Pimp My Ride, different TV shows. Eventually you wind up becoming a signed artist here in Nashville.
Yep.
So how did you take the next step?
So I had actually come here to visit a friend of mine here in Nashville. There's a guy I grew up with. And while I was here, remember I told you my cousin and a friend of mine were rappers. At that point, they were my artists.
Yeah.
Because I was supplying the beats, right? So they meet this big time producer. I won't put his name out there. And eventually they go to LA. I go to LA. And that was the next step. Like, so then I'm going to parties with celebrities. I'm doing all this crazy stuff, and eventually that producer moves to Miami, and my cousin and my friend go back to Philly. They were waiting on that guy to call everybody back to Miami. So while they were doing that, I came back to Nashville. Everybody left LA. I came back to Nashville, and ended up with an artist deal, publishing deal. Excuse me. And through the publishing deals, where I ended up with all the TV stuff. So I've got music on 27 TV shows.
Wow.
In every country on the planet. So
collecting checks.
Yeah, back end, but it works.
But I mean, that's for somebody that's watching, right? And they want, so many people now, you got Fruity Loops, right? I don't even know if they charge for Fruity Loops for the basic version.
Oh, they do now.
They do?
Yeah, it's a big boy now.
So you got different software programs that people have access to, and you got young people that are aspiring to be the next person to do beats, right? But you were able to get stuff landed. What do you think is something that you can share, like some nuggets you can share in today's day and age of how to go about making a revenue stream with the product that they're putting out?
Well, right now, I mean, there's no secret to that. It's YouTube, it's SoundCloud. I mean, you don't really need, when I was doing it, you needed somebody that, for instance, like my publishing deal, the person that was getting me all the TV stuff, that person's job was to go out and mingle and deal with people in that world. And all I had to do was stay at home and just make music. Where now, through SoundCloud and YouTube and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of an open market. Anybody's accessible, you know what I mean? Where at that time, everybody wasn't accessible unless you had an agent or something. So I would say, man, YouTube is like, it's literally just a ball of wealth that you can grab from. If you hustle hard enough, you can, I mean, there's guys on YouTube that they film themselves making a beat from scratch. That's all they do. And through that, people find out who they are, and they end up on a Jay-Z record or like that. There's a girl, I think she was 17 years old. She ended up on the last Jay-Z record because of the internet. You know what I mean? So the internet and YouTube and SoundCloud, things like that are key right now.
So it's no longer a thing where you need a third party. Like right now it's like direct to consumer.
Yeah, I mean, unless, I would say this, if you meet somebody that's really, really, really in and has their feet in, then it's worth it. But for the most part, it's direct to consumer now, or direct to, you can email an A&R guy and send him a record or a link, where before it was like, hey, I'm gonna introduce y'all to this A&R guy from blah blah. That was a big deal,
right?
You know what I mean? Like I remember being in a studio with people, And an A&R guy came through the door, and everybody's like, yo, that's the A&R for Rockefeller. Blah, blah, blah. Now it's like, if I want to talk to that guy, I can find his email. I can find his Instagram.
Right. That's
you know
true.
what I mean?
Absolutely.
I can directly speak to that man. I don't need an agent or his friend to go take him a record. Now I could just literally tell him, hey man, I'm so-and-so. I got 20,000 followers. Here's a link to this record I got right now. And from there, who knows?
See, there's something you said, and even though you grew up in a different era, I mean, I grew up in a different era than now, things have changed so much. But the hunger that you had, going to sleep 3 and 4 in the morning, I'm not trying to say and be an advocate of people staying up during school hours, like you need your education. But nonetheless, the hunger, it doesn't have to be 3 or 4 in the morning, but the consistency is what I'm trying to get at. If you're trying to develop something now, you need consistent work to where you start developing followers, because followers are going to come when you have something that is new and new and new, and they have something to look forward to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, look at a guy like Casey Neistat, that guy on YouTube. He's not doing it anymore, but he was doing a blog every day, and the dude's a millionaire now. But he was literally blogging every day, putting that work in every day. And it's not just blogging, because when you're done shooting the video, you got to edit it, color it, do all this stuff. Takes time. It's the same thing as me staying up till 2, 3 in the morning. If you're doing that every day, eventually you get good at whatever it is that you're trying to, it just takes time. And I would say that right now, especially with young people, like, so I teach audio production at a high school, and I was just telling one of my students, he's probably my top student, but I'm telling him the other day, I'm like, listen, this whole thing with you using a software where you can just grab samples and make records, that's great, but you putting a limit on yourself.
Right.
Where when I got to New York, and that is not to brag, but when I got to New York, I was making beats like this. The drums, then I was putting all the key stuff down. And then when I got introduced to sampling records and putting everything in top, that like completely took, and that's what I'm telling my students is like, guys, you got to have multiple tools in your toolbox. If somebody calls you and says, hey, do you know how to lock in drums? Yeah, I know how to lock in drums. It's going to cost you $350. All right, cool. I'm going to send you the files. Here's the Venmo. I'll pay you. Just do it.
Right.
But if all you know how to do is make beats on Fruity Loops, you're limited to one thing.
You're not as marketable.
Yeah. Right. And you can't, like, who's going to call you for anything other than for a beat?
Right.
And how long is that going to last? So, like, that was the one thing when I got to New York. Karan, my friend, was like, dude, I'm gonna show you how to sample records, and I'm like, I don't do that. And he's like, no, you're going to do this. And I'm like, no, I don't do that. I know how to play. He's like, I don't care. You're gonna learn how to do this. And because of that, I was able to make a lot more money along the way because I knew how to sample a record. So,
but that brings up something too that's just cross. It doesn't have to be a beat maker. It can be a musician. It can be a singer. If you're not teachable, then you're going to hit a ceiling. And at some point, you're going to probably tick some people off too. Because it's like, oh, so you know everything? Okay. Go and know something on your own.
Yep.
Like, you have to be moldable and open because we don't all know everything.
We don't.
Yeah. And if you have the ear of somebody, shut up. Like, just listen,
Yep.
Because you're going to learn something.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like technology, moves so quickly now. To assume that you know anything at all is silly. So that's another thing I tell my students, like when they're like, well, you know everything about this. I'm like, no, I don't. I know this much. Like a software, like Logic, there's so many things in Logic that you'll never do because you don't, it's just not what you do, but I'm never gonna never know everything about Logic.
Right.
That's what I tell my kids. But I know enough to be like, all right, I'm gonna be able to show you this and that and the other. So yeah, I agree with that. It's like when you get somebody, for instance, when I was in New York and Karan's telling me, no, I don't care what you think you know. I'm gonna teach you how to sample records. If I would have fought it, eventually he would have just said, all right, well, I'm not gonna, and then what happens when you get a call about, hey, can you sample this record, make a beat, and send it to me? I don't know how to sample records. All right, bye.
Right.
Just move on to the next guy. And then the next guy gets that $400 or $500. You know what I mean?
It's almost like you have to be a sponge. Anytime you get an opportunity, that could be the only opportunity you ever get. So you have to soak it up for what it's worth.
Yep. There's you know the guy Corey Henry?
Yep.
So I heard him say in an interview, he was talking about how like he was talking about black gospel, like guys that play keys at church, and he was saying that a lot of those guys can play any song in like one or two keys, right? Mm-hmm. I can't remember exactly how he was breaking it down, but he was saying those guys in one or two keys, they could play you anything. Mm-hmm. But he's like, ask that guy to play it to you in every key. So what he was saying is, even though there was video footage of him as a little kid on an organ, he was like small, like maybe like 5, and he's playing the organ. But what he was saying is that he wasn't content with that. He wanted to get lessons so that he could really understand how it all worked.
Right.
And that actually, it kicked my behind too, because sometimes you get comfortable. You know, you're an incredible bass player. At some point, you get comfortable, like, yeah, I got it.
Right.
And you don't really care to learn. Now, there's a drummer named James Holloway, who's a friend of ours, who he was on the road with me for a long time. James would watch, when we were out on tour, he would go watch every drummer. Mm-hmm. And then one night, we were in Amsterdam, actually, and I asked him, I said, hey, man, why'd you spend all day on stage, backstage watching drummers? And he goes, because you never know what you're going to learn. And I just remember feeling like an idiot. I'm like, okay. But that's the primary example of a guy that's incredibly good at what he does, but he's still trying to learn. So even if it's a drummer that he didn't think was very good, he'll go watch to make sure that he's not missing anything, which is, you know, is dope. So.
Can you talk a little bit about artistry? So you were a signed artist. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like? And I know from your experience, it kind of, it was a learning experience, and also something that maybe empowered you to say, you know what, maybe you don't need a label.
Yeah. It wasn't a bad experience. It was a fairly good experience, again, because I was able to produce records and able to sing and do all that. I didn't have to hire anybody to produce the record. So the budget was given to me. So when you sign a record deal, you know, a lot of these kids hear, oh, so-and-so signed a deal for $1 million, but that $1 million doesn't go in the artist's pocket. You got to pay a producer to make the record. You got to pay to have it mixed, marketed. All these things come into play, features, all that kind of stuff. So I was actually given my full budget, and I produced my record, wrote 90% of my record. I brought in a couple people to co-write, but yeah, it wasn't a bad experience. It's just that once you get a record done, people have to understand. For those of you that don't know, a record label is basically a bank. Okay, so if a record label gives you $500,000, you owe that record label $500,000, and until you don't pay that money back, that record label pretty much owns everything that you did. Not to be negative, but for those of you that are artists and are either signed or about to get signed, you need to know this. Record labels will also do things to keep you owing them money. So, for instance, a record label, A&R might say, "Hey, I'm gonna come see you in Seattle, and I'm gonna take you and the guys out to dinner. Y'all go to Roof Chris. The ticket is $800, right?" That A&R then says, "All right, guys, great show tonight. It was great having dinner with y'all. See y'all back in Nashville." A&R comes back to Nashville. That receipt for $800 that he paid on a record label's credit card, he gives it to the secretary, and then that $800 goes toward what you got to pay back. So now you owe the record label $500,800, and they don't tell you that. So record label flies you out to New York and puts you up in a hotel and blah blah, and they spend $3,000 that weekend. that money, you owe the record label that money. So that's fine and dandy if the record label is doing what they're supposed to be doing to help you make the money back. In my situation, basically, I was on the road, and I'd gone out with Salvador, who's they're incredible musicians, but I told my record label I won't go out on the road with them unless I have a band, because these dudes are there's no way I'm gonna be able to open for these guys. So yeah, I was out with them, and I spent all this money, came back with receipts, and they were like, we gave your money to another artist.
Wow.
Like my marketing money, right? Because you have, like I said, out of that budget, you have to take money out of that budget to promote the record or whatever. So I just started realizing, and this was like at the age MySpace was just coming into play, kind of thing. But I started realizing, like, man, with this MySpace thing, I can have people listening to my stuff. What do I need these guys for? Basically piling money on. And that's kind of where I was by the end of it. It lasted, I was on that label for about 2.5, 3 years. And so then what happened was, I did a Spanish song on the record. EMI Latin decides they want a Spanish record. So they were going to sign me. So I was going to be half signed to this label and half to EMI Latin. And then the day that we were supposed to have the meeting, the A&R guy got fired.
Wow.
So no more Spanish record, which, thank God, I tell people all the time, the best thing that could have happened was that dude got fired, because if I would have signed a deal with EMI Latin, now I have 2 slave owners. I'm sorry, but record labels, whether it's the Christian market or the general market, they're slave ships, and they're banks. And if you make a record, let's say that you make a record, right? You now owe the label $500,000, and the label decides they want to shelve you. Shelving is when they just put you away and
put you in purgatory.
Yeah, they put your record away and nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
And the only way you can get out of that deal is if another record label comes and buys your deal. So then they buy your deal. Now you owe that record label $500,000 plus whatever they paid to get you out of your deal. So it's like this weird cycle where now I would just tell young people, like, man, you don't need a record label for nothing. Distribution, nothing. Nothing. Look how many of these kids are millionaires now because of SoundCloud.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, you don't need a record label anymore at all for anything.
And I would say it's important for artists to not just say, oh, I can sing, oh, I can rap. Learn how to write.
Yeah.
Because the person that writes your content, if it's not you, is going to be somebody that is going to probably make, when you start making money, if you got legit deals in place for royalties, they're going to be making the money, and you're going to be stuck to just whatever you make at a performance, if you make something at a performance.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. You're right. The publishing is like, if you're a singer and you're not writing your songs, whoever's writing those songs is getting that money.
Right.
The only way you're going to make money is when you do shows, and unfortunately, unless you're able to negotiate a good deal, there's a thing called a 360 deal in the record business, where 360 means that record label gets 360 degrees of anything you make. So if you sell a t-shirt, they get a cut. If you book a show, they get a cut. If you get paid to be on a TV show and perform, they get a cut. Because the record labels are having a hard time selling records, so now they have to dig into your money even more to make money. And like you said, if you're not writing those songs, where are you getting money from? Because the record label's taking your 360 money, and you don't have anything published. So yeah, and the other thing I would say is, if you're a young person and you have music on YouTube and you're making money, you need to learn the business side. Knowing the business side of this is more important than being a great artist.
Right.
Because how many great artists are out there that are broke?
Yep.
Because they didn't understand the business. And guess what? You can't go back and tell a judge, I was 15. The judge is going to say, well, somebody signed that paperwork. There's nothing we could do. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, got to know that business.
Absolutely. And I think I've heard the analogy before, like it's better to sell 5,000 copies, 10,000 copies with you owning 100% of your rights than selling 50,000 copies and the label's getting 75, 85, 95%. Like I think we think sometimes like being under the umbrella of a big machine is automatic. It's an automatic ticket to getting success. I mean, they may put you out there, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be making the same amount.
That's the thing. And some people were more enamored with being famous than actually the money side. But you have to remember what happens when everything goes away. When you're not famous anymore, now what? If you don't have any money to fall back on, you basically just wasted 15, 20 years of your life.
Right.
Just being famous.
Right.
Getting stuff for free and but if you get to the point where you're not hot anymore and you're not famous anymore, how are you making money? That's when people look back and go, oh my God, I could have made $30 million in 30 years and my managers got it. My record label got it because I was so busy just being famous. You know what I mean? So that's why there's a lot of people out there that say don't chase the fame, like, worry about your craft, because there's a lot of, I mean, dude, how many artists are out there making a couple $100,000 a year? Think about this. If you make $100,000 a year touring, that doesn't sound like a lot, but would you rather be making $100,000 a year touring and owning all your stuff,
right,
or $100,000 a year sitting behind a desk?
Absolutely.
Which one would you rather have? Yep. Dave Chappelle asked his dad. Dave Chappelle's parents were all professors. He told his dad, I want to do comedy, and the dad said, well, you got to be realistic about money and all that. And he said to his dad, how much do you make? And his dad gave him a number, like let's say it was 40,000. And Dave Chappelle said, well, if I can make that doing comedy, then I'm good, because you're good and you make that. You know what I mean? So it's a measuring success.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So that's the thing. If you can own your stuff, who cares if you're not a millionaire? If you can own your stuff and pay your bills and live comfortable, I'm cool with not being famous.